The dark side of human nature also fascinated Michael Kelleher until he learned too much.
I've spent so many years dealing with so many violent people that I want my later years to be part of the natural process of what it is to be human.
The author and former profiler now searches for peace.
And that involves nature. It doesn't lie. It doesn't manipulate. It accepts everything. And it's part of who we are.
While working on his book, Murder Most Rare, Michael came as close as he dared to a host of deadly women.
My original interest in female serial killers came from the misguided perception in the United States that there weren't any, or that there was at most one, which to me seemed inconceivable. So found nearly 100 since 1900, both in the United States and out, and stopped at that number.
The killer intriguing him most is Vera Renzi.
She was probably the most unique female serial killer that I came across. She was clearly intelligent. She had resources. She murdered in her own home. She controlled the environment in which she killed for years and years. The daughter of a very well-to-do family, a pretty girl, but a wild girl, who wound up being, well, I don't know how to put this delicately, one heck of an efficient serial killer.
In the 1930s in Bucharest, Hungary, Vera Renzi murdered her lovers. Each and every one of them. After 2 failed marriages, the beautiful Vera invited a long line of suitors.
She allures, she draws this male in. And this wouldn't be happenstance. This male would be selected by her. And she would use her allure, her tacit beauty, her money, her sophistication to draw him in a sexual way.
Vera chose married men.
This would be his last night on earth. His dinner would be well seasoned with something not to his liking that would kill him.
Vera's seductive dinners were laced with arsenic.
Arsenic is a popular method of poisoning that we've seen throughout the centuries.
What will happen, the individuals who take it, first of all, will begin to feel sick. Arsenic causes a disruption of the membranes of the stomach, something called hemorrhagic, meaning blood-filled, gastritis, meaning inflammation. So they'll get a stomach ache.
I would imagine that she would only let him know at the very end when he began to suffer intensely from the poison. She would be conveying to him that he would never leave her, ever.
But Vera's plans don't end with death.
She had a propensity for preserving her murdered males in zinc coffins in her basement.
The symbolism of trophies for serial killers is maybe something to brag about their event, even though they may not brag about it to another person. For them, they say, I've got this.
Vera collected morbid souvenirs.
A souvenir is something that a killer might keep to bring back good feelings of the individual, good feelings of the event, and something that's more personal.
For today's criminal investigators, there's an explanation for such bizarre behavior.
They want to hold on to that piece, that connection, and so people will try to hold on to bodies.
But without preservation, Vera's mementos would soon decompose.
Within 20 minutes of the time of death, our bodies begin to break down. The bacteria that are in our intestines, within 20 minutes, travel outside of our intestines and do what they do best. They start digesting things.
Vera had thought of everything.
Well, zinc, at least at the time that these crimes were committed, was probably the most expensive, the most long-lasting form of casket she could purchase. Embalming would be out of the question because it would let her secret out.
An airtight zinc casket and Vera's damp basement may have provided the ideal conditions for a type of mummification.
Adipose sear formation, where the fats in the body complex with the salts, calcium, sodium in water or in moist soil and form a soap-like or waxy consistency. Then the bodies will be preserved and eventually become hardened, almost stone-like.
This is almost a museum of death of her own design. Her victims are here, they're in her control.
Anytime she wanted to go talk with them and interact with them, she could. This would, for a while, serve a purpose and meet a need that she had. Eventually, it would cease to do so, and I think that's probably when she would go out and get another victim.
What drove Vera Renzi to such a macabre ritual? Modern analysis suggests she was simply looking for love.
Her first husband allegedly cheated on her, and this infuriated her. She had a terrible fear of rejection from males.
Vera set a course for revenge, but in a way that preserved the adoration of the men who followed.
Everybody wants to be loved, and once you have it, you always want to have it. But many of us lose it. We lose things that we love, as well as people that we love. And we usually go on. We'll mourn the loss or grieve or move on to something else to replace it. We don't kill.
Vera replaced love from the living with love from the dead. She killed for more than a decade until a suspicious wife called police to Vera's basement. They found 35 zinc coffins. Among the preserved victims, her 2 missing husbands. On their first wedding anniversary, Frederick Cotton is in no condition to celebrate. He's dying of arsenic poison. Maryann poisons for profit.
Burial clubs were a common way for poorer members of society to ensure that their loved ones had a decent and proper funeral that they could pay for.
Burial insurance extends to children. The Cotton's year-old son dies of poison 6 months after Frederick.
You pay a couple of pence per month into a fund, and after a certain period of time, you will be allocated a lump sum. So you could, for the investment of, I don't know, sort of 20 pence over the course of a few years, you could potentially be seeing a return of 3, 4, 5, 10 pounds.
Early death and a pauper's burial delivers dividends.
Once again, my condolences, ma'am.
And because arsenic symptoms mimic gastric infections, common at this time of poor hygiene, Maryann is above suspicion. It's thought she poisons 3 husbands, a lover, her mother, a friend, and at least 12 of her own children and stepchildren.
Well, not just a woman, but a person who would kill her own flesh and blood would appear to me to be callous and ruthless. And in Maryann Cotton's case, if it was done for gain, particularly so.
More than 130 years later, Sherby Green discovers Nanny also killed 2 of her children.
It's the worst that she could have done, is to poison her own children. It's believed she poisoned her sisters, her mother, many other family members, but her own children, her own flesh and blood. You know, these are the children that she carried for 9 months that she gave life to.
A mother could kill her own flesh and blood if she is a psychopath or if she is insane. The psychopath is the individual who has no bonding or no attachments and no empathy for others. The only person who matters to the psychopath is the psychopath.
Criminal profiler Dr. Deborah Sherman Coughlin believes Nanny and Maryann share another trait. They were drifters, using distance to blur the pattern of their misfortune.
If you have one body in one jurisdiction and one body in another jurisdiction, if they're not talking to each other, then you have what's called linkage blindness, where they don't see that these crimes are related.
But one piece of police work can't be fooled by gender or geography. A technique still used today in modern toxicology labs, like the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner in New York.
We very rarely see arsenic cases, but every once in a while, if there is a suspicion of an acute arsenic overdose, we do use the range test to screen for arsenic.
Head of the lab is Dr. Marina Stajich.
So it's a very simple test. 3 pieces of copper wire. And I have a positive control that contains a known amount of arsenic, a negative control, and a urine sample, which we're going to test for the presence of arsenic. This is what they would have done in Maryann Cotton's day.
After heating with hydrochloric acid, the poison in the positive control and the urine sample should be revealed.
This was the negative control. The copper wire didn't change.
The arsenic emerges. Deposited on the wire is a black metallic coating.
What was the unknown specimen, there is also a black deposit. These 2 would indicate the presence of arsenic.
Developed more than 160 years ago by scientist Hugo Reinsch, the test helps convict Maryann Cotton and Nanny Doss.
Arsenic is actually one of the easier poisons to detect. One of the reasons being that it's actually a mineral poison, so it stays in the body.
The dead can speak, their bodies revealing all to the toxicologist. Maryann is sentenced to death by hanging. Her notoriety becomes a nursery rhyme.
Maryann Cotton, she's dead and she's rotten. She lies in a bed with her eyes wide open. Sing, sing, what can I sing? Maryann Cotton is tied up with string. Where, up in the air.
Some women believe that they are actually entitled to kill a man who cheats on them or is leaving them for another woman. This idea is frequently reinforced in writings and stories and movies and, goodness, hundreds of years back, that this was something that women were simply entitled to do.
London, 1955. And a pretty club hostess, Ruth Ellis, had no idea she was about to divide a nation and make British legal history.
Good time, girl. At 19, she's running a club in the West End of London, getting people to, buy drinks at extortionate prices. And she would con people into parting with a lot of money here in the club.
Ex-policeman John Ross oversees Scotland Yard's Crime Museum, where Ruth Ellis is remembered.
We collect items from famous cases and display them in the museum. The stories that go with all these cases, you learn from history, nothing ever changes.
Moonlight and kisses, peaches and cream.
Many men fell under Ruth's spell, but only one would dominate her attention. The dashing David Blakey.
Self-centered, racing car driver, never actually going to make it, but spent all his life. Rich boy, just running around, enjoying himself. She was madly in love with him, desperately in love with him, and he wasn't with her.
But after a 2-year relationship, the suave race car driver was proving hard to tie down.
Your girlfriend have affairs with other women all the time. Purely self-centered, selfish man, a playboy.
Each dalliance delivered more frustration for Ruth. David's philandering didn't seem to slow down. When Ruth became pregnant with his baby, things only became worse.
He punched her in the stomach. Whether that was to get rid of the baby or it was just in one of their violent moments, you will never know. But all he did was send her a bunch of flowers the next day and said sorry. That was it. Yeah.
Ruth lost her baby and planned her revenge.
Women are much more relationship-based. They are much more into their feelings and their intuition. I feel that when women's relationships are disrupted, they can become furious.
A gun is an interesting weapon because it allows the shooter, the killer, to dispatch their victim without even getting close to them. It's all going to be over in a matter of minutes.
This is a small caliber revolver. This is classified as a low velocity handgun. In other words, the speed at which the bullet would be leaving the end of the muzzle would be less than 2,000 feet per second.
On April 10, 1955, David Blakey was drinking in the Magdala pub in North London. Ruth and her weapon were ready.
The reason this is such an effective weapon is that it doesn't take much force at all to pull the trigger. In fact, probably 2 to 3, maybe 4 pounds of pressure.
As they came out of the pub, Ruth Ellis stepped out the shadows and called his name.
David!
Fired 2 shots at him.
When a bullet enters that body, the kinetic energy will cause a cavity, something called a temporary cavity, that's caused by energy radiating out from that speeding bullet.
He just walked up and emptied the other 3 bullets into him.
When a bullet enters a body, it perforates through the skin. As it does so, it will damage blood vessels and it will cause massive internal bleeding. Blood will accumulate and the body will go into shock when it has lost approximately 20% of its circulating blood volume.
It was a very public murder. Many witnesses. In 1955, murder was a capital offense.
The problem for Ruth Ellis was she had a death wish. She'd killed the only thing she ever loved and she wanted to die.
Facing a death sentence, Ruth offered no resistance at her trial.
You know, she was actually admitted when asked about firing the bullets into David Blakey. She said, yeah, of course I went there. I went to the Magdala Public House that evening with the intention of shooting David Blakey and killing him. Now, she's admitted the premeditation, she's admitted the act. She has to be found guilty, she has to be found guilty of murder.
Although many believed Ruth was driven to murder by her victim's actions, English law at the time could make no concession.
It's difficult to imagine a civilized society putting to death a killer who had a clear-cut history of abuse from the individual that they killed.
Modern laws recognizing diminished responsibility were yet to be written. Despite public protests and parliamentary petitions, 28-year-old Ruth Ellis was hanged at Holloway Prison. It would be a turning point in English justice. New laws recognizing battered woman syndrome and diminished responsibility would follow. Within 10 years, capital punishment was suspended. Ruth would be the last woman executed in England. In a remote field in Norway stands a silent reminder of a deadly woman.
It's not to celebrate her, but to mark where one of the worst female mass murders in the world was born.
For a century, residents of the small village of Selbu have lived in the shadow of their infamous resident, Belle Gunness. Headmaster Torget Storseth has 2 great passions. One is teaching. The other, his search for the truth behind the Norwegian serial killer.
My father told me the story about Belle Gunness. She was clever at school, but she might be characterized as an outsider among the children. So it might be an illustration that she was easily angered.
In the late 19th century, an angry young woman left the chill of Norway for a new life in America's Midwest.
Well, a lot of Norwegians went to America. We were a poor, poor country, and they went to seek their fortune, seek new opportunities.
Torget has come to LaPorte, Indiana, to solve the mystery preoccupying his village to this day.
They are curious, I think. How could a woman from our area become one of the worst female serial killers in the world? Hello.
Welcome to LaPorte County Historical Society.
Thank you.
Good to see you. Good to see you.
Author Sylvia Shepard has chronicled Belle's crimes and is anxious to share notes with a fellow seeker from Belle's hometown.
It's been said that she probably killed in the 40s, close to 40.
The pair meet at the local museum, where some of Belle's handiwork is kept.
I understand that it is Scandinavian because I had an archaeologist look at it, and he said from the forehead and the way that it's shaped that it was indeed Scandinavian.
The skull's identity is unknown.
And right here it even says, found in the outhouse at the Gunness farm.
It could be any of the lonely men who strayed into Belle's trap.
She wanted Norwegian men, so she advertised in a Norwegian newspaper called the Scandinavian. See, many of these men had come over from Norway, and they wanted a woman, a wife, you know, somebody, companion.
Belle was a good catch. She had profited from a string of insurance claims. She'd lost a candy store to fire, and 2 husbands in suspicious circumstances.
Belle had 48 acres here. Chickens, pigs. You know, she advertised and said that she had all this. And she did have all that. She just didn't include what she did with the people. She had an allure. Many men came and thought they weren't going to be staying, but they did.
In 1908, one victim to fall for Belle was Norwegian Andrew Helgeline.
He was just one of those people that answered one of her ads.
Convinced his future would be here with Belle, Andrew surrendered his life savings, $3,000.
She kept men here even when they came here and didn't intend to spend the night, or they stayed and they went back and got their money and came back.
By the time Andrew Helgeline settled in LaPorte, Belle had 3 foster children to raise. The farm's income was modest, so her new man's savings were a windfall. But this homely scene was a prelude to death.
Female serial killers frequently use poison as their weapon.
Former FBI criminal profiler Candice DeLong, with 20 years' experience, recognizes Belle's business plan.
They don't have to get close to the victim, they just have to get close to their food. And strychnine is something that one would expect to see on a farm.
Strychnine was commonly used as rat poison.
Strychnine is a phenomenal compound. It comes from the seed of a tree in India.
Forensic pathologist Dr. Janis Amatuzio, based in Coon Rapids, Minnesota, knows strychnine's inevitable result.
It antagonizes or stops the inhibitory reflex, so that all of the reflexes of the stronger muscles, the flexor muscles, are exaggerated. What an individual who takes strychnine will feel is initially perhaps a sense of anxiety or nervousness. Then they'll notice muscle twitches and muscle spasms. And then they actually get into almost a seizure-like state where they have convulsions. These contractions are painful. And the victim is conscious throughout this whole process and probably terrified.
It would take two types of people to be able to watch that. A sadist would probably enjoy it, or a cold-hearted individual for whom killing was no big deal. The greater gain, getting their money, was worth whatever they had to do to get it.
But Belle's treachery would go much further. It would rank among the most grisly crimes in Indiana's history. Belle's story took a mysterious twist one spring evening.
There was a handyman that was in that house, and when he went to bed that night, the occupants of the house were Belle and 3 children. The fire began at about 4 o'clock in the morning.
The Gunness farm was razed, its occupants consumed. The only survivor, Belle's handyman.
When they got down through the ashes into the basement, there were 4 bodies there, 3 children and a female.
And there was more. Investigating the fire scene, workers noticed soft spots around the farm and began to dig.
They would find all of the victims wrapped in gunny sacks, parts of them. They had been all dismembered, fit into these sacks with lime. There were children that were in her care, and of course the men who came to visit her and never got away.
Among the victims would be Andrew Helgeline, the partner wooed from Norway.
They found him in a garbage pit where Belle had carried garbage, fish heads, tomato cans. It smelled terrible. That was the excuse for the smell.
Other human bones suggest the Gunness farm pigs helped conceal further victims.
I think the fact that Belle threw the body parts of her victims into a pig trough is a pretty good indicator as to the type of person that she was, how she felt about these men that she killed. What kind of final send-off is that for someone that was a human being to throw their body parts in a pig trough? Well, that's the kind of person she was. She didn't care. That's where she thought they belonged.
Altogether, 14 bodies were found, including Belle's foster children.
Probably she had given poison to her 3 children and killed them. Maybe with a hammer blow too, because there was found holes in their skull after the fire. How could a mother do a thing like that?
There's another mystery. Did Belle perish in the fire? The only adult female body left few clues.
At that time, they thought it was Belle dead in the fire.
But the body was smaller than Belle's. And inexplicably, the skeleton was headless.
There is no logic to the fact that there were her children's skeletons intact, and then the one adult skeleton, which one would think would be hers, the head is missing. And the head, of course, would be the one part of a skeleton that would have the most identifiers.
Was this just another of Belle's insurance scams? Torgette's search for the truth is not yet over. By 1908, Belle's American adventure had come to a grisly end. 14 bodies were found on her farm, many chopped into pieces. Townsfolk were desperate to know what happened.
Hello, welcome to LaPorte, Indiana.
Thank you very much.
In the circuit court.
The Belle Gunness case is something that is probably a major part of the history of this whole town.
Judge Robert Gilmore's predecessor presided over LaPorte's most infamous trial.
The skeletons were in somewhat of a fetal position, somewhat clenched.
The fire's heat might explain it, but skeletons buried beyond the flames were also contorted.
And then the argument became whether or not it may have been strychnine that caused the bodies to clench and get into the fetal position.
Strychnine, basically what it does is it causes the stronger muscles to overcome the weaker muscles. So the hand will flex at the wrist, the arm will flex at the elbow, and the elbow will flex at the shoulder. And likewise the legs. The legs will contract and flex in a position such as this.
Strychnine was confirmed in the stomach of Norwegian lodger Andrew Helgeline. Belle was exposed as a murderer. But there was one more mystery. Did the serial killer perish?
The whole trial centered around whether or not, in fact, it was the body of Belle Gunness that they found in the remains of the fire, or whether, in fact, it may have been some other third party, we know not who.
In this courtroom in 1908, jurors heard how the headless body seemed too small for Belle's large frame. One theory was the fire had shrunk the body.
Well, you know, they tried to say that just like a roast, this body cooked up and got skinny then, you know, skinnier than Belle was. But the children were still the same size. And their heads were all down there.
Despite conflicting evidence, jurors found the headless body was Belle Gunness, but many believed otherwise. And 23 years later, there was one more twist. Torgette still has questions. The biggest of all, was Belle really killed in the farm fire?
There was a real division within the community as to whether or not she died in the fire or whether she escaped and basically was on the run.
I absolutely believe that she escaped. The head was never found to that female body. She had a whole week to get away between the time when the fire was discovered and then the first body in the ground was discovered.
23 years later, a local newspaper speculated that this Californian murderer, fitting Belle's projected age, could be her.
Then they sent a picture back here, taken in a very strange pose with her hands like this. Well, why would you take a picture that way? I think that's why she did it. She's clever.
If Belle did feign her death, there could well have been more victims.
It is unlikely that her murderous behavior would stop. Being a fairly young woman at the time, less than 50, she was into it. So I'm guessing she simply relocated and resumed her activities elsewhere.